I now call to order the February 11th, 2021 meeting, which will be conducted remotely. Due to the state of emergency, all planning board members are participating remotely. I will now ask our planning director, Aaron King, to call the roll.
Okay, George Bryan.
Here.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Here.
Jason Grubbs.
Here.
Tommy Hicks.
Here.
Clarence Lamb.
Here.
Chris Leak.
Here.
Mo McCray.
Here.
Brenda Smith.
Here.
Jack Steelman.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you. When there is a vote, a roll call vote will be conducted. Each board member will be recognized and asked to clearly state their name, their vote for the record. All guests participating in this remote meeting, either through Zoom or by phone, will remain muted until recognized by the board for comment. Today's meeting is being broadcast live on TV 13 and is also being live streamed on the city's website. The meeting will also be replayed on TV 13 tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and Sunday at 4 p.m. Our first order of business today will be the consent agenda. These are items for which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, or items for which staff has recommended approval and no one has signed up to speak in opposition. For our public hearings today, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. There is no rebuttal period. Once you have been recognized by the board, staff will unmute your microphone so that you can provide your comments. After the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one is permitted to speak unless the planning board asks them a question. The items under section B of our agenda will require final action by the elected body, either the city council or county commissioners. As such, votes taken today are recommendations which are considered by the city council or board of commissioners during its review of the request. For special use district zoning requests, the petitioner must identify the intended use or uses of the site and give specific details on how the site will be developed. If you are addressing the board today, we would ask that before you begin your comments, please give us your name, address, and zip code for the record. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the January 14th and January 28th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, is there a motion?
Move approval, Clarence.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second, Jason Grubbs.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. King, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right, 9-0.
Thank you, that's unanimous. I'm now going to recognize Desmond Corley for the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This afternoon, you won't be seeing very much of me. The consent agenda is just 2 items. We had a lot of items continue to march or withdrawn completely. So I will share my screen and please let me know if you're not seeing what you should be seeing. The first item on the consent agenda is C2. That's a planning board review 2021-03, a planned residential development by the name of Gatehouse Terrace on 8.89 acres on the west side of Old Salisbury Road, north of Guilford Drive. Here is the proposed plan for Gatehouse Terrace. I've highlighted the active open spaces that the applicant has proposed. This development, as I said, is 29 lots. It's showing 2 access points onto public streets, Old Salisbury Road and Guilford Drive, and then a connection to an existing stub in a development to the north. This plan meets all UDO requirements and staff recommends approval.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval.
Moved by Mr. Lamb,
Second, Jason Grubbs.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. King, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right, it's 9-0.
Okay, and the last item on the consent agenda, I apologize, is C3, not C2. PBR 2020-04, which is a development by the name of Bell West. This is a 108 lot planned residential development on 38.86 acres on the east side of Bell West Drive, north of Linville Road. Here is the proposed Bell West development. There is an additional condition that didn't make it into your agenda this evening, and so I want to read that for you all. You might be able to see, if you can see my cursor, this hatched area is existing right-of-way. So this additional condition would just say that right-of-way has to be closed before you get any permits, or I'm sorry, before you sign the plats for this subdivision, should it be approved. It meets all UDO requirements otherwise, and staff recommends approval.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval and with the additional condition presented by Mr. Corley.
There's a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second, Jason Grubbs.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion?
I've got just one small question, please.
Mr. Stillman?
In our agenda book in the staff comment section, would someone explain to me, please, what SCM means?
SCM is a stormwater control measure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So Desmond, I have a question on that. That pond looks awfully close to those units, the SCM number 1. Did the civil engineer put it there on purpose, or is that just a proposed area?
It's just an approximation, and if you want to hear from the engineer, he's on the call, but generally at this stage, the engineers are showing where a stormwater management device may be located. They work out the details through the permitting process once they start to try for grading.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just, that was my one question. It just looks awfully close to those rear setbacks. That's it. That's all I've got.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay, that's 9-0.
Mr. Chairman, I have no more items on your consent agenda. I will stop sharing once I can get back to my screen. And we would turn it over to Tiffany White. I believe she's going to continue the discussion about Cottage Courts.
Okay, so before Ms. White gets started, I did want to just share some thoughts and comments on this. So this case was originally heard at our January public hearing. At that time, staff gave a detailed presentations, and then we did have a public hearing. At that time, board members had a lot of questions, and I think staff addressed each question via email and some via phone as well. In my opinion, the planning board staff has certainly given us enough information to make an informed decision. Please keep in mind that the public hearing is closed. We did close that in January. So I think the way I would like to proceed, I'm going to address staff. I think Ms. White has some additional information that she would like to present. After her presentation, I will recognize any planning board member who may have a question, and then I'm going to move for a motion. So with that, Ms. White, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to show a very brief presentation, just reviewing where we are in this process. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. So we're here for UDO CC8. This amendment proposes UDO standards for PUDs and cottage court development. The planning board held a public hearing on this in January, and board members raised several questions at that meeting, and it was continued to tonight's meeting. In recent weeks, staff researched additional questions from board members and further discussion was held at the January work session. So just a very quick review of PUDs. This came out of the Innovative and Land Efficient Residential Development Regulations report from February 2020, which recommended the consideration of a PUD ordinance. Typically, PUDs have a mix of residential and non-residential uses and allow for flexibility in design and innovative land use. While our existing MUS district is similar to a PUD, it's not very flexible or user-friendly in its current form. Rather than add another use to the UDO, staff recommended modifying the MUS district to serve as our PUD provision. And proposed modifications included removal of the tiered district standards and regulations represented elsewhere in the UDO and reducing the required number of uses from 3 to 2. Moving on to cottage courts, this was also a recommendation that came out of the Innovative and Land Efficient Residential Development Regulation report. Cottage courts are comprised of small, attached or detached housing oriented around a central open space or courtyard. And this type of development is one of the missing middle housing types. Staff is proposing the following standards after researching other communities who have these and doing extensive research here locally as well. Cottage courts only being allowed in certain zoning districts within GMAs 1, 2, and 3, a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 14 units per cottage court development, a maximum building height of 30 feet, a minimum parking requirement of 1 space per unit, and a density bonus of 25% above the underlying zoning district. Based on discussions at the January public hearing and the work session in January, staff proposed several tweaks to UDO-CC 8, the ordinance language itself. The language has been added to the MUS purpose statement to better define the expectations of PUDs related to the site and building design, pedestrian orientation, and transportation. And all of this specific language was shown to you at the January work session and was also included in the information that you received for this public hearing as well. Language has also been added to the cottage court provisions to clarify that attached dwellings are only allowed where the underlying district allows such uses. And that in non-residential districts, you can have lots of 20,000 square feet or greater as a minimum. Text has also been added to clarify that any lighting and parking areas shall meet the UDO's lighting ordinance standards for exterior lighting. And some language has also been added stating that walkways in the courtyard need to be constructed of an all-weather surface. Staff believes that UDO-CC 8 as revised will expand local housing choice and allow for innovative development and infill. These provisions will further the recommendations of legacy and increase the number of housing units in the community. And effective PUD and cottage court provisions will also accommodate design concepts that have recently been proposed by developers, but which have not been allowed under our current UDO standards. With all that, staff recommends approval of this UDO text amendment.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. White?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Donegan.
Well, first I wanted to start by saying I appreciate the changes that you made to the ordinance, both for MUS and cottage courts. I wanted to ask one clarifying question about cottage courts. Under the language of this ordinance, is it possible to build 2 cottage courts next to each other as part of a larger development? Because the language says that you have to have you can have a maximum of 14 dwellings. So I mean, if you had 2 separate cottage courts, could you have 28?
Yes.
Okay, so there's really no limit.
Well, I'll jump in on that one, Melinda. I think if somebody was getting to that point, you would probably start looking at the PRD rules because those start to branch out to accommodate those larger subdivisions a little bit better than what the cottage courts do. I think if you were getting up in that range, you'd probably start looking at those PRD standards.
I don't quite understand what you're saying, though. What does that mean? Does it mean that they would probably go in as a PRD?
I think rather than go through the process to get 2 separate approvals for 2 cottage courts that are adjacent to each other, somebody would probably rather propose 1 PRD with all 28 units and go through the process one time, if that makes sense.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just also want to mention, we did receive an email from the Neighborhood Alliance today that I believe board members received. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that.
Yes, we
Yep.
sure do. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, if I could. Aaron, first a clarification. So if they went through the PRD process, would they get the 25% higher density?
No, the PRD process does not have that.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know. I mean, and if you have different developers for different cottage courts, you wouldn't do the one PRD anyway. You know, there've been several things that have come up in discussions with the neighborhoods, partly because this was confusing to me, and I found it was confusing to other people to have the mixed use special use with the cottage court, because everybody thought it was all special use and it wasn't. Is there a maximum number of parking spaces that will be allowed?
In the cottage court provisions,
Yes.
Tiffany, if you know that one off the top of your head, I'll look and see.
My understanding is I asked that question at the work session and was told that you didn't see the need to have any max parking rules.
We don't have a max in here. I don't see one, and typically we don't regulate maximums. We do have standards in the UDO that when it's, and Chris or Desmond may need to help me out, but when you get, I believe it's at 175% of the required parking additional standards with respect to landscaping and so forth kick in. So that is the one way that we do regulate maximums in the UDO, but that's about the only place we speak to that. And Kirk or Chris, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
That's my recollection as well. I was going to say that Ms. McRae brought up that point that Ms. Dunnigan was referencing last month, basically that while there's not a maximum in this ordinance provision, just given the cost of adding parking to these developments, that it's kind of in a project's best interest to allocate more land towards the actual revenue producing units rather than the revenue draining parking.
So if a developer wanted to put 28 spaces in there, then you'd have a fairly large parking lot in that, and there's nothing addressing grouping of parking spaces within this cottage court ordinance, like grouping not more than 6 spaces together or anything like that.
Correct. And we didn't want to get too prescriptive in here. We wanted to leave some flexibility in there for certain circumstances where grouping larger numbers may make sense and it may not be intrusive. I don't think, and I kind of go back to Kirk's example that we referenced from Mo's comments before. These, you know, if you're thinking about smaller infill sites, I don't know, that land is really precious. I don't know that developers would go in and try to take that up with more parking than they need to either lease or sell these units. I think that land is so valuable. I think, frankly, you're going to see folks push towards having the minimum amount of parking spaces they can. So in theory, yes, I suppose someone could do that, but I think in practice, I think you're going to see folks really try to use that land for units and things that make the development functional rather than additional parking spaces.
Well, when I was researching this with other sites, what I did find was that there were other places that did accommodate 2 sites per place because that was the scale that they were building at. And you know, the word cottage in here is misleading totally because it has nothing, there's no requirement of any size, small or whatever. So these are houses, not cottage court, it's a housing court. And so in these others, I kept seeing 2. So that's why I was wondering, because they were building, trying to accommodate folks that needed at least 2 cars, and they ended up with that. So
another point, kind of, I think to Aaron's point, the more parking lots you build, the more issues you're going to have with ingress and egress points. So those cost money as well. It's going to further complicate what the developer is trying to do. I don't think from a practical standpoint, they're going to go out there and just build parking lots to build parking lots. Doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense, I don't think. And I mean, I think cottage court is probably a term of art. I don't think our staff came up with that. I think that's probably in the planning and development community what they're referred to. So, I mean, we could probably call them housing courts or something like that. But I think probably for standardization, it makes sense to keep calling them what everybody else calls them.
The other thing,
Just don't call it district court.
What is that?
I said, just don't call it district court.
Yeah, no. The other thing that came up, are accessory dwellings or accessory structures allowed within this format?
They're not expressly prohibited. I don't know that you would, accessory dwelling unit, you would still have to get, under the current rules, you would still have to get special use zoning for that piece of it. Accessory structures like a garage or a tool shed or something of that nature, you could have that provided it met the standards for accessory buildings and setbacks and so forth.
And the other thing that I discovered in looking at what was happening around the country is that within these court setups, there has become private open space and public open space. How is this defined in the ordinance that you're presenting to us?
In terms of public open space that is owned by a public entity, say the city of Winston-Salem or Forsyth County, we haven't accounted for that, and I don't think you would see that in what's proposed here under our standard.
I misspoke. Common open space and private open space. So in other words, a house would have a yard that was theirs and private to them, and then the courtyard or whatever that would be common open space. How is that figured out within the ordinance?
Mr. Bryan, this ordinance doesn't actually require any private or kind of cordoned off open space for the units. To get back to kind of what Mr. Grubbs was talking about with the whole nomenclature of this, it's that communal kind of centered courtyard open space that serves the whole development. That's kind of the idea behind this. So there's no requirement that each individual unit also have that kind of private open space.
Conceptually, these are almost like detached townhomes, if you want to think about it that way. I mean, you've got the walls of the structure that the homeowner is going to own, and then everything else is basically common space or common area.
I think if you're buying into a development like this, you're buying into the idea of this like communal living. It's a thought process, and if they don't want to regulate their front stoop as private, then I don't think it's our job and I'm an urban planner by trade, to regulate that use. So I don't think that we need it. I think it would be over redundant in the code.
I didn't even realize it was an issue until I started looking into it. But I guess in terms of our ordinance, private open space would not be included in the calculation of the court, right? Or the common open space.
That's correct. That minimum that's in the ordinance would have to be in that kind of central, highly centralized piece of the development. Now, certainly if a developer wanted to allocate some other open space, maybe on the other side of units or things of that nature, that could be done, but that wouldn't give them any additional credit towards meeting that minimum requirement.
Okay, that helped. Thank you.
All right, if there are no other, yes, Ms. Dunn.
I do have another comment to make, and that is in relationship to the email that we received from the Neighborhood Alliance. I just wanted to offer a slightly different perspective. I know that, Mr. Chairman, you believe that we have had enough as a board, enough time to consider this ordinance. And I do, agree that we have had a lot of discussion on it. But the perspective that I wanted to bring out is really the perspective from the point of view of the community. We know that the development community is engaged and informed of this because they came out at our public hearing last time and spoke about it. But, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and being able to communicate with the public is always difficult. And I really feel, personally, that we really would benefit from having a larger stakeholder process where we engage the community, had a dialogue on this. I am not opposed to cottage courts. In fact, I think, that it could fit into our development here. And I'd like to see us come up with some kind of good fit for the community. But I think we need to have community buy-in and not just community surprise after the fact. And because that's not good for anybody. And what I'm thinking about really is back to when we did something of a similar impact, which was the PRD ordinance. We had a stakeholder process that involved developers and people from the community. And there was a lot of back and forth discussion. And in the end, there was a consensus. It wasn't anything that was opposed by any group. So that's what I would like to see. I think that from the email that we received, it's clear that there is a desire for more dialogue. I don't see the harm in furthering that if we can.
Ms. Dunnigan, I take your thoughts, and I think they're so noted. My opinion, I feel like we've gone back and forth with staff over this. We've given staff 30, 40, 50 questions, and I don't ever think that we're going to exhaust all of the questions. This is an advisory board that we're going to make a decision that goes before the city council. Personally, and again, the board has the final vote, I feel like we've been given enough information to make a decision. But that's going to be a board vote. Respectfully taking into consideration what the Neighborhood Alliance did. I read their email thoroughly. I think they made valid points, as all points are valid, but to come to a general consensus, I don't know if we're ever going to get there with Cottage Courts. So again, it's going to be a board decision. Yes, sir, Mr. Lamb.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. Yeah, I feel completely prepared to, to form an opinion. And I also think that this is just such a small piece of a larger development ordinance. It's just one more tool for development. I think it's one more hopeful opportunity to increase the supply of housing. I'm a firm believer in that the more supply there is, the overall cheaper product will be. And that's one of the things that we're trying to achieve with this cottage courts concept. So I am completely prepared. I feel like we're given more than adequate amount of time. So I would like to make a motion. I move that we do recommend to the elected body that they approve this.
There's been a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there okay? Second by Ms. McRae.
I would like to say one thing, Chris.
Yes.
We are a town of a few tools in our pockets for building of affordable and of housing. We are in a crisis of construction costs and other insurmountable costs like tap-in city fields, tap-in impact fees. If we eliminate tools, then we will also eliminate creativity. We will eliminate hope and other things. And I think there are many other opportunities for the public and the community to voice their opinions about development, along with this tool being ready to use.
There is a motion and a second on the floor.
In discussion, Chair, I still feel very uncomfortable that the way that this has been presented to the community and the lack of presentation to the community, that this cottage court is a by right in existing zoning. And I think when we come upon things like that, that I feel awkward and uncomfortable passing something like that without clear understanding from the public on this. My other big hang up with the Cottage Court, with the way it's written, is that it can be a gated area, which works against what I believe is legacy and is the cohesiveness of neighborhoods. So I would love to vote for it, but I could only see this in terms of the Cottage Court being just like the MUS as a special use amendment.
All right, so noted. So there's a previous motion and second on the floor. Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
No.
Melinda Dunnigan,
No.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay, that's 7-2. And Mr. Chairman, that brings us to the end of the agenda. If you're ready for staff report, we can dive right into that.
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
All right, well, we'll let Mr. Corley lead off with a preview of your March public hearing if he's ready.
I am. We have 7 public hearing items next month or lined up for next month, including another text amendment. This is one that we discussed at the work session a couple weeks ago regarding the changes that the General Assembly, or the changes to the general statutes enacted by the General Assembly. Us needed to make a kind of wholesale adjustment to our development ordinances to be in line with those statutes. The others are rezoning petitions, and then there is one more PRD for you to review next month.
Thank you, Desmond. And Desmond actually segued into the next item on my list, which was the NCGS 160D text amendment he referenced. We spent a lot of time at your January work session. Chris Murphy did a very involved presentation, went through that in detail. We did want to carve out some time if there were questions that the board had at this time. If you don't, we're going to carve out some time at your February work session as well. So if anything does come up between now and then, we'll allocate some time there. But as Desmond mentioned, we do want to bring that to a public hearing in March. So if you don't have anything now, that's fine. We'll have some time for you at February work session as well.
All right.
I'll just share just 2 other items with you. If you follow the city on social media, you may have seen some posts that have been posted for Black History Month. I want to recognize Michelle McCullough and Heather Ratlin on our historic resources team. Each year we share a bit of history on there. And this year our theme was looking at contributions to the medical and healthcare community by African Americans in Winston-Salem. And so if you've been following on there, each weekday, they've shared a new post that's kind of shared a little bit of that history, and we've gotten some pretty positive feedback, a lot of stories that folks may not know. So if you do follow it on social media, take a look at that. It's been pretty well done. There'll be some more content, obviously, as we're only on February 11th, so there'll be more to come there. So just wanted to make folks aware of that if you haven't seen that already. And just another item, we did take the Doral Drive Renolda Road plan through the approval process, and at City Council, there were a couple questions, and I think Melinda hit some of the discussion we had in there, and a little bit of it was in street connectivity in some of that area, creek crossings and things of that nature. We did talk about that with council, and they asked us to bring back, we shared with them some of the difficulties around creek crossings and how our UDO treats that. They did ask us to prepare a report to do a little research of peer communities. So we're going to be compiling some of that information to bring back to the General Government Committee probably sometime in the next 2 months. So I just did want to share that. I wanted to recognize Councilmember Mundy. I know he was with us this afternoon. It looks like he's popped off before I got a chance to recognize him. But that's all I've got for you at this point, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you so much for the staff report. Is there anything else for the good of the order? If not,
Well, we have our motion to adjourn. Everyone stay dry and warm. Warm weather.
thank you. Motion second.
Thank you.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.